In the spirit of respect, authenticity, and reconciliation, the town of Slave Lake honors and acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional lands of Sawridge First Nation within Treaty 8 territory, home to Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples who have occupied these lands since time immemorial. Councillor
I'd
Gramlich.
like to make an amendment to the agenda where we remove 3A.
Any further discussion? Call to question those in favor. And that is carried. Councillor
I'd
Gramlich.
like to make a motion to adopt the agenda as amended.
Any further discussion? Call to question those in favor. And that is carried. Councillor Ferguson.
So for the previous minutes, there's a couple typos. Motion 14 and 15 just should say defeated. And then motion 19, there's just a typo with cold shot, says bloodshot. Autocorrect, gotta love it.
Do we want to bring those back? Those will just come back then? Or do we want to?
I can bring them back, or you can accept them as amended, and I'll make the amendments before they're signed.
Okay, do we
I'll
want?
make a motion to accept them as amended.
Okay, motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Call to question those in favor. And that is carried. Okay, we will move into reports. Kush, you're up. And can we get his mic turned on, please? Thank you.
Good evening, your worship, members of council. The purpose of this report is to provide council information on the post-date speed limit review for Caribou Trail. Council requested administration in July last year to conduct a review related to the speed zone on the Caribou Trail. The intent was to confirm if an increase in posted speed limit is justified on Caribou Trail. Administration undertook a posted speed limit review in-house with reference to Transportation Association of Canada's Canadian guideline for establishing posted speed limits. The guideline is a good starting point when conducting a review related to posted speeds on a roadway. However, it is important to note that the guidelines only consider road classifications, functions, and physical characteristics of roadways. Other factors like driver expectations, sight distance, operating speeds, traffic volumes, including the volume of heavy vehicles, and other engineering judgment shall be incorporated during a thorough review. The finding of reviews using the guidelines is described in this report. As per our transportation master plan, Caribou Trail is classified as arterial road. Arterial roads generally serve as a line haul facilities, carry traffic between activity centers, connecting with collectors, other arterials, and freeways, but not local streets. On-street parking is not normally permitted, or it's not normally permitted on this type of road. The transportation master plan provides information related to posted speed based on road classification, as shown in table 1.1. So based on that information presented in the table, arterial road has a posted speed of 50 km/h. It is safe to say that the hierarchy of the road as a minor arterial due to the fact that there is no access control, which is there is no limiting left-hand movements or availability of service road connecting to the lots. Typical approach for setting speed limits are there have not been any uniform single method used by Canadian Road Agency until now. Many agency would set the speed limit, posted speed limit as a function of design speed. Either they will set posted speed limit as 10 km less than design speeds, or they will set the posted limit same as design speeds. Design speed is a selected speed based on the various geometric features of the roadway. When posted limits on existing roads are reviewed due to operational or public concerns, engineering studies are typically conducted, which would include reviewing road characteristics, safety records, and measuring operating speeds. Sometimes 85th percentile is used as a predominant indications of the appropriate posted speed limit. This is based on the reasoning that drivers are reasonable and travel at a speed which they could avoid crashes. However, 85th percentile may vary by time of the day, level of congestion, weather conditions, lighting condition, road surface condition, and the vehicle mix. The intent of the posted speed limit guidelines is to provide engineers and traffic practitioners with an evaluation tool to assess appropriate posted speed limit based primarily on road classification, functions, and physical characteristics of a roadway. The guidelines provide a recommended speed limit value that can be compared with operating speeds. If there is a significant discrepancy between the two, then it should be identified, reviewed, and rectified. A significant discrepancy between the two is usually a result of a road where risks are not apparent to the drivers. When the recommended speed limit from the guidelines is lower than the existing posted speed limit dictated by the policy, a review of the applicability of the policy may be prudent. Note that these guidelines do not address setting posted speed limits in school zones and playground zones, or setting variable speed limits on a roadway. Another thing to understand is what is a speed zone length. A speed zone is a section of a road with a single posted speed limit throughout its length, should be applied to a homogeneous roadway section. A homogeneous roadway section is where followings are consistent from a driver's perspective: land use, road function, horizontal and vertical geometry, cross sections, which is like number of travel lanes, lateral placements of roadside hazards, presence of sidewalks, etc. Also, we need to consider traffic volumes, access controls, pedestrian and cyclist volumes. Drivers can only absorb and respond to a limited amount of information at one time. Frequent speed zone changes can result in driver confusion and loss of respect for the posted speed limit. It is therefore desirable to limit the number of speed zone changes and to provide at least minimum length of speed zone. A minimum of 1,000-meter long speed zone is recommended for posted speeds of 70 km or higher. Shorter lengths can be used at a slower speeds, but speed zone length of less than 500 meters should be avoided. Another thing to keep in mind is there are also legal and other policy frameworks, which is provincial or territorial laws and regulation that governs the maximum rate of speed. When in effect, these laws and regulations will be governed. Most jurisdictions have practices or policies that governs the relationship between design speed and posted speed limit that define the posted speed limit for certain classes of the road, which is defined in our transportation master plan. The literature review findings say that there are important factors that needs to be considered when establishing speed limits on a roadway, which are roadway geometry, alignment, adjacent land use, number of access points, what are the operating speed, pedestrian presence, heavy vehicle presence, traffic volumes, and past accident records. On a rural or high-speed urban roadways, the measured 85th percentile speed is often referred to in reviewing the speed limit. Statutory limits are commonly determined for urban roadways with respect to arterial, collector, and local residential roads. These speed limits take into consideration the roadway function, the surrounding area, and specific road users. Speed zones are established in response to risk potential based on land use and geometric characteristics. It is important to outline specific guidelines dealing with these issues in order to determine appropriate speeds. So now the recommended posted speed limits based on the guidelines goes through an evaluation method, and the evaluation methods is based on is a function of road classification, physical characteristics, and engineering factors that influence the level of risk. Another objective is like it is applicable to all types of roadway characteristics across Canada. It is systematic, consistent, and repeatable, and it is simple to use. For municipal, arterial, collector, and local roads, the ideal speed is determined based on the typical function of these roads and typical public expectation under minimal risk conditions. Then a systematic evaluations of risk related to geometric and traffic criteria is carried out. A recommended posted speed limit is then established according to the level of risk. The higher the level of risk associated with roadways' physical characteristics, the lower the resulting posted speed limit would be. Depending on the level of risk, the recommended speed limit can be same or lower than the ideal speeds. To undertake the review, the guidelines follows the following step. So there are 1 to 7 different things that needs to be capture in form of data collection. And during evaluation, those data collected is then entered in a spreadsheet that is provided by Transportation Association of Canada, which is based on risk, that is low, medium, or high. The spreadsheet identifies the sum of weighted risk scores to determine the recommended posted speed limit. The higher the sum of risk, the lower the recommended speed limit is. Below are the evaluation criteria specified by the guidelines and how it affects to Caribou Trail. So inputting all those collected data into spreadsheet, it is justified that recommended speed limit can be set to 60 kilometers per hour. So again, I should go back and should clarify that while I was taking a review, we divided Caribou Trail in two segments. Segment 1 went from Highway 2 to the corner of 8th Street Southwest. And then the segment 2 went from 8th Street Southwest all the way to Highway 88. And the reason being doing two segments is because the width of right-of-way is consistent for both the segments. I thought it would provide accurate representation of speeds on that particular roadway. So then we inputted all that collected data into spreadsheet, and it was justified that recommended speed limit can be set to 60 kilometers per hour. Segment 1 gets overall risk scoring of 54 and segment 2 gets 53. So as per the guidelines, a risk scoring of 57 and higher is required for recommended speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour on urban undivided minor arterial road. Refer to attachment 1 and 2 for overall risk weight scoring on these segments. And then I also attach attachment 3 that shows how the criteria are scored based on risks. It is important to note that TAG guidelines are a good starting point when conducting a review, but it's only limited to considering road classifications and physical characteristics of the roadway. Other factors like driver expectations, sight distances, operating speed, traffic volumes, including the volume of heavy vehicles and other engineering judgments shall be incorporated during decision-making of posted speed limits. Consistent higher posted speed limits on entire Caribou Trail is not justified as the width of the right-of-way decreases starting from 8th Street all the way to Highway 88. The lots are closer to roadways with allowed left-hand movements. There is lack of adequate stopping sight distance along some sections of the Caribou Trail. There's lack of line painting. Narrower lane width during snow conditions could be a factor. High heavy vehicle use during the year. Further on, street data collection and review will be required if council wants to pursue higher posted speed limits on segment 1 from Highway 2 till 8th Street Southwest. So the options for council is to accept this report as information and maintain the existing posted speed limit on Caribou Trail same as 50 kilometers per hour, or accept this report as information and further direct administration to undertake required data collection on segment 1 from Highway 2 to 8th Street Northwest. And if council opts for option 2, then there will be some budget implications will be required for completing the data collection and further review to confirm if higher posted speed limit is justified on that segment or not. Administration recommends council to accept this report as information and agrees maintaining the existing posted speed limit on Caribou Trail same as 50 kilometers per hour.
Councilor Graham.
I was the one who really wanted to see this move to 60, but I think you've done enough homework and enough work that it's going to end up being 50, even with more research. So I'll make a motion that council accepts the report and information and agrees to maintaining the existing posted speed limit on Caribou Trail, same as the 50 kilometers an hour.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion?
Alec.
For Adams.
I'll talk fast. The only concern that I have here, because obviously from what I'm understanding, the section 2 from 8th Street to 88 makes no sense simply because of the amount of access points, that insane blind corner on Main Street with the bumps. I get it. After that, it seems like it should be fair game, but yeah, I get it. But the other section, even putting that to 60, I don't necessarily think is a good idea because we're going to have the stop sign at the railroad tracks anyways. And then we've got the pedestrian crosswalk
Yes,
at the one section, so
and it's only like 1.6 kilometer long.
it's not that long, yeah.
Right, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, call to question those in favor. And that is carried.
Thank you,
Okay,
Coach.
thank you.
Thanks, Coach. Sounds very detailed. Jack. You're up next.
All right, so you have a request before you today in regards to multiple myeloma awareness month. The purpose of this report is to bring forward a proclamation request to the Town of Slave Lake Council to declare March 2024 as multiple myeloma awareness month. So the past several years, Alberta Ministry of Health has supported the Myeloma Alberta Support Society and declared the month of March for Awareness Month. The Myeloma Alberta Support Society is seeking continued support from the Alberta Ministry of Health to proclaim March as its awareness month. Have sent a formal request to the Alberta Ministry of Health, and a copy was sent to the Town of Slave Lake from the chair of the Northwest Alberta Support Group for multiple myeloma. Along with a copy of the correspondence, the chair of the Northwest Alberta Support Group is requesting to take the proclamation to our council and to have March 24 proclaimed as the multiple myeloma awareness month. Options 1 is to proclaim March as requested, or 2 is to not proceed with the proclamation. You have a copy of the proclamation attached for your, or the letter or the correspondence that was received, and the proclamation requested, along with the applicable policy for council.
Councilor Brown.
I'll just say, I know a little bit about this disease as I have two very good friends, and man who coached me in minor hockey, Jim Zinnick, which most of you would know, and a friend who worked with the Edmonton Oilers, Barry Stafford, both have this. And so it's not curable, it's livable, and they're making advances, and it's very rare. And all the money that gets donated to the different cancers, this is one that kind of suffers in that because it's such a rare disease. So I'm in favor of make this proclamation if the mayor so chooses to make so.
Councilor Adams.
I agree. I'd like to make a motion that that we proclaim March 2024 as multiple myeloma awareness month. Maybe some pronunciation in there.
Is there any further discussion for that motion? Okay, call to question those.
Ally.
Oh, so Ally.
No, I just want to let,
Not Ally.
I did kind of have my hand up. Although I do support the cause and the proclamations, I just want to let everyone know, I just kind of looked up kind of what happens in March, different days, different weeks. I'm going to list them all. So we got 5 days for Homeless Month, Brain Health Awareness Month, Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, Epilepsy Awareness Month, Liver Health Month, Music Therapy Awareness Month, Multiple Myeloma Awareness Month, National Social Work Month, Nutrition Month, Pharmacy Appreciation Month. These are all in March. World Hearing Day, Dental Assistance Recognition Week, World Obesity Day, World Lymphedema Day, International Women's Day, World Glaucoma Week, Safe Sleep Week. I like that one. Brain Awareness Week, Neurodiversity Celebration Week, World Sleep Day, Creative Arts Therapy Week, National Poison Prevention Week, World Down Syndrome Day, World Water Day, World Tuberculosis Day, and the last one on March 26th is Purple Day, which is in support of epilepsy. So I just want everyone to know that there's a lot going on, probably not just this month, but every month. Other than that, I just wanted you to know, but I can support the cause as well.
And St. Patrick's Day.
I will chime in there. So last meeting, there was a lively discussion surrounding the flag lighting signage proclamation policy. That was a very inarticulate description of that policy. That would have been the appropriate discussion to make those points, and it did pass that we approved the policy. Generally that holds for at least 6 months before it comes back. So while there are many days in March, that policy was approved. So this is a separate motion on the floor just for this proclamation. So is there any further discussion on that? Okay, call to question those in favor. And that is carried. So is now the time that I make the proclamation?
Yes.
Bear with me. Okay. Myeloma is the second most common blood cancer. Multiple Myeloma Awareness Month promotes awareness of this relatively unknown disease and the importance of early detection, diagnosis, and accelerated access to treatment. Multiple Myeloma Awareness Month, March 2024, whereas multiple myeloma, also known as myeloma, is a cancer of the plasma cells found in bone marrow. And whereas 11 Canadians are diagnosed with multiple myeloma every day, while great strides have been made in treatments and therapy for people living with myeloma, there is a need to raise awareness and support clinical research to find a cure. And whereas several support groups throughout Alberta and the Canadian myeloma community are committed to supporting all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, culture, gender, socioeconomic background, or language, who are impacted by this disease. And whereas Multiple Myeloma Awareness Month is an opportunity to further educate the medical community and the public on recognizing the signs and symptoms of myeloma for earlier diagnosis, which can lead to better outcomes for people suffering from this difficult and incurable disease. Now, therefore, I, Francesca Ward of the town of Slave Lake, encourage the citizens to learn more about multiple myeloma and early signs and symptoms for earlier diagnoses and better outcomes for patients managing multiple myeloma. We hereby proclaim March 2024 as Multiple Myeloma Month in the town of Slave Lake. That was a lot of saying myeloma repeatedly. This tripped me up a few times.
Perfect awareness.
Naming committee. Do you want to start that off?
Yeah, so this is just a general item. There's no documentation to go with this, and it's just a general item to solicit. Administration's looking for some feedback as it relates to naming committee involvement and lists that or delegations that come to the town, whether it's council or this committee, for recognition. So for naming of streets. So as you know, we've had a few of those over the last few months. What it became clear is that although our policy is somewhat clear on the role the naming committee plays, in the sense that it's there to potentially vet names or potential names for recognition, and to, you know, essentially be keeper of the list, if you will. What is unclear as to how names come off that list. And so administration is looking for some direction as it relates to how you would like to see that list managed. And so there, I think, you know, to start the conversation, there could be a number of different approaches. There could be, you could set potentially, you know, one option may be that on a yearly basis, you identify one name off that list. Maybe it's the name that's been on there the longest, and you know, every year you recognize one individual through the honorary naming of whatever we're naming, whether it's a street or a park or whatever the case may be. And you kind of set that as we do one a year, and that's the process. So that's one potential way to get off the list. It could be, doesn't have to necessarily be as formal as that. It could be, but I think you need something that needs to establish a process, because we're just kind of going around in circles here as it sits right now as to where these requests are coming to, and then how do we decide which name, if to name a street, or if you're going to name a street after someone on that list. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Councillor Adams.
Yeah, I agree. We need, I would like to see us be a lot more structured than just randomly picking a street once in a while to do it. I'd rather have us set a date that we're doing this on a regular basis, yearly. I like one or two. We haven't done this for a long time. Is it that we still have lists on here from 2018 or names on here from 2018? I see they've added, what's this naming committee started in 2018? Does anybody know?
2012. It goes back.
2012. Okay, so I'd like us to see it in a hierarchy of some sort of when they've come forward, when they've approved. Maybe the naming committee needs some sort of rules around how soon or when they feel these names should be added to the list. But I do definitely think we need to formalize this. And I like the idea of trying to get some history and some naming of these people that were strong members of our community, have a long-standing history with us, and have done significant things within the community. And I think we need to start actively finding the right place to put these, whether it's a park, a square, a street, whatever the case may be. Thank you.
Counselor Moallem.
Have we looked into what other communities do? Like,
There's a variation. You want to speak to it, Ashley?
I did some light research of it, so it kind of depends too on the municipality. Some are cities and some are like smaller towns like ours. So some, like they do use the naming committee kind of as like the vetting process, and then they would try to come at least like say twice a year to council and remove names from the list or name things. So it was a bit more structured, but it's still kind of what we're doing, but they're coming more often and removing them. So that's kind of what I found.
Counselor Gremlich.
Hypothetically, we'd go down the road of we're taking one name off a year. So now, so council does decide the name. I get that part of it, right? But who decides, okay, we're gonna do a park, a road, like who? We still have to find the thing we're gonna name, right? Or like, are we supposed, as council, supposed to go out and like, hey, I found a wicked park to name after somebody, or like who brings us the thing to be named? Because what I always thought was like the naming committee did vetting, but they'd request something. Hey, council would like to name a road, or housing would come and say, we'd like to name this project we're doing. And then the naming committee would provide suggestions. I believe at one time we gave them a name of a person. And then the last time we did it was an Indigenous name for something because we thought it fit with that. But they would provide suggestions and let that group choose. And so far people don't choose the naming committee suggestions. So council either just overrides it anyway, or in that particular thing, the housing group did. But who would decide what gets named? Like, is administration going to say, hey, I think there's a road we should name this year? Just out of curiosity.
Well, that is part of the reason that there isn't that clarification there isn't there either, right?
Yeah.
I think you're kind of explaining two different processes, right? So I think you might have those instances where you might have a third party organization or something along those lines coming, looking, like the example you said, right? And so I think the naming committee has a role, or the list has a role to play, and we can provide some names or potential that have been approved, that have been vetted, that you could utilize for, if you wish, if the housing authority or whoever wish, is looking for some ideas. So that being one, they're essentially going to come to you with the project. They're going to come to you with the request. And then it's a matter of bringing that report back to council for those instances. The other ones, that's really up to that's where we're kind of looking for some direction for. Now you might get like the last request that was before us, they were specific in terms of what they were looking for, even the neighborhood or the area. So that request, there's a little bit less guesswork maybe involved in what they're looking for at the very least. But some of them may just be, this is just a citizen that's on the list, and there really isn't necessarily a street or a park or something that's suggested. So that could be up to council's discretion as to what, what that may be, or I don't know necessarily administration is going to necessarily be able to provide you that, but I mean, you've pretty much got access to anything that's not named currently. Parks for the most part most of those parks have been already covered. So we're talking about streets here at this stage for the most part.
Counselor Adams.
Something what I'd like to see is maybe a more defined piece for the naming committee. I'd like to see the name that's being suggested, a history on why that person was approved, so that we understand, because I'm looking at the list. Most I know, but there's one in particular anyways, or two, that I have no clue about, and would like a little bit of history on something like that. Then I'd like to see a request of what they want, because we may not be able to accommodate that request for whatever reason it may be. And then from there, I think the town council at the time, whoever that may be, would then decide what street is, boy, there's feedback. What street is going to be named from there, either using the suggestion or overriding it and going with the other one.
I do like that suggestion. There is feedback. I can hear that now. I don't know what that is. Where's that vacuuming?
That's a vacuum.
Oh, me and Steve are having issues apparently today. I really like Counselor Adams' suggestion there. I think it actually should be I'm wondering if we should toss it back to the naming committee and say, every year you come forward with a name, the history. I like the history because I'm looking at the list on his computer and there's a couple names I don't recognize. So they're before my time. So,
Some of these names are inaccurate.
right. So if we could have the naming committee perhaps meet and once a year at the same time, so whatever that is, and they come back with a name suggestion and what they would like to name, and then we can debate that here. So every year we maybe agree to, we're naming something. We don't know what it is, but naming committee bring forth an option, a reason why. And then I guess we could also set the policy that if there are special, like one-off things, so someone is requesting a name, like let's say housing, for instance, was requesting a name for something, that we could then put forth that request to the naming committee and they could bring it back again. Counselor Adams.
Yeah, I was thinking more that maybe the naming committee needs to take a more active role.
That's what I'm.
Our
exactly- yeah, that's exactly
expectation
what I mean.
is that public goes there, not here to ask for those names.
Yes.
They vet it. You don't just get, I'd like to see the naming committee actually say no to somebody if it doesn't make sense, right? But also come up with that list. But I do like the idea that they come forward with a list of like 3 names or whatever once a year to present to council. Council then looks at that and
Yeah,
decides what's
it
needed.
could be, a couple
Something
of
formal.
options, knowing that our expectation on council is that we're going to name, I'm just throwing it out there, one thing a year. So we'd expect the naming committee to come forth. And if someone wants a name to be added to the list, they would then present to the naming committee.
Yes.
But the naming committee brings us these recommendations, and it could be one recommendation, like this is the name. And here are some options, streets. I know we're kind of out of parks, but trails, a request, and then we debate it here. And then the other piece to that would be is sometimes these naming options come up from outside, not just town-owned assets, but other buildings or things like that. The naming committee could also be used if to look for a recommendation is kind of where we're on the same page. then. Okay.
So the only thing I would suggest is I think the naming committee might need some more direction as to how they come up with that name. Which name do you like? Are we, so you're again, they're gonna come back to us saying, is it first in, first out? Is it whoever's the loudest? Is it, who's the most recent? I think they're gonna basically say to you, yeah, no problem. We can vet the names. We can come to you once a year with a name and the story for you to decide. But I think they're gonna ask you for some more guidelines as it relates to which name are they bringing you.
I like the first in, first out idea.
I'm not a fan of that.
I
don't
don't
think-
know if I'm a fan.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, then I would ask why then somebody who was voted onto this, vetted through the naming committee thought that this person's name from 2018 is very important. Then why would we supersede that with somebody from 2022? Just because some incident happened or something?
So
When?
is it first in, first out in your mind as like when they were added? Because a whole bunch of them were added
When
on
they
the
were
same
added.
day.
I know they were, so we
So
got a
there's, like,
prior, but
9 here that are
we
added
have
on
to
the same
work,
day.
we have to work through the backlog. I understand that.
Yeah.
But what I would like us to see, if we're only, say we're naming one
Mhm.
a year, I think at first we're gonna have to name more than one a year. Then I'd like us to see them present forward at least 3 options first. And then we're choosing one out of that, or whatever the case may be.
Counselor Hughes?
I was just gonna actually ask Ashley, because she looked like she maybe had more from her light research on that guideline process. Do you have something to speak to there?
I just wanted to clarify something, I guess. Just so I can understand we're on the same page. So there would be, instead of delegations coming to council, they'd be coming to the naming committee and bringing their delegation report. The committee would then say yay or nay, you're added to the list with the dates in the report and the reason why. Then maybe at the end of the year, annually, the naming committee would bring a report saying, hey, these are our top lists. These are the reports and why, and then council has to pick one name. Is that kind of?
That's what Stephen and I were.
I think more or less, but Jeff's point is we need to provide some sort of
they-
guideline
We need
for the
like
naming committee
check
to
mark
help them
criteria.
do that, right?
Because right now
Yeah.
the naming committee role would be to curate the list and have the reasons why they were added to the list, and there's gonna be some work to flesh that out, because right now it's just names. And then provide a recommendation to council annually to name XYZ street or park or pathway after a choice. But then it's the guidelines there. He's asking, yeah, what guidelines? Is it first in, first out? Although we do have an ish.
That could get really convoluted because like on the list, I was part of the naming committee, every mayor was on there, so. Is that the very first mayor is up next? Like,
I also feel like it could be hard depending on what it is. What if one of the names on here speaks to a certain history of something that's asking to be named, right? Like then you can't always do the first in, first out. It might be something really befitting of someone who should. So I feel like honestly, some of that stuff could be at the discretion of the naming committee. The people who are on the naming committee as well, like, well, I mean, to bring forth as the recommendation though. Right? Within reason. I mean, most of the people who sit on that have been longtime residents and can probably speak to the history. So for me, I'm kind of saying, I don't really have an interest in micromanaging it. I'd like them to bring forth what they think and what works and what makes sense.
Councilor Moallem.
I think I'm on that committee right now. I think we do have someone who's probably on that committee who's very familiar with lots of these people. 10 years from now, I'm not sure if you're going to have someone with that experience with everyone. No, with everyone on this list, did they all come and do a delegation to be on this list, or did
No.
the naming committee just say, okay, well, here's a name, here's a name, here's a name?
Councilor Gremley.
but if we ask the chair of the naming committee what they think,
We could also do that as well.
lucky for us, they're sitting in the audience tonight.
What do you think, Joe?
He's gonna have to come up to
You have
the.
to come up, sorry. Sorry.
How would you
How-
foresee
what are your
names coming
thoughts?
off the list? What do you think of?
I don't think it's a good idea if the first in on, first off.
Correct, that's very obvious. I agree with you.
And from what I recall, you were there, we just brainstormed and came up with a list of ideas of names that we could recommend should there be a request for this, for such. That's how I remember it.
So if we change it to, because that's kind of what we're tossing around here, if we change it to once a year, we want a recommendation from the naming committee as chair. Would you guys like to, if there is one, would you like to just come up with your own and suggestion and reasoning why, or do you want guidelines?
Hypothetically, let's say we're gonna name a ball diamond. So maybe we go to the naming committee and say, hey, we're gonna name these ball diamonds. Why don't you guys come up with who these ball diamonds should be named after, of an arena or this park or this quadrant? That'd be a lot easier for the naming committee, right? If we,
Yeah.
You
we
want
gave
to
you-
think we want to name.
we have an item to name. You give us the best person for that. That would probably work great, right?
Exactly the role that I thought the naming committee was in business for.
So there, we kind of have our answer. Admin and or council could decide. This year, we're gonna name State Street, and Joe and his team get to go find one of these great builders of the community that live close to
And then
8th Street.
Bring
or-
it back to
or
us
something.
and we discuss.
Would that make sense?
I don't think the naming committee exists to dream up
No,
things to name.
Okay.
We just need to be ready to make recommendations when something
needs to be named.
needs to be named.
That's how I see it too.
Councilor Adams.
The way you guys are saying that, though, there's absolutely no structure. And it's just random and we're doing what we're doing now.
Well, there is, because Barton Park needed to be named,
So,
right?
yeah, but
We-
right now, you look at the history here for the however many years. That we've got names on here from 2018. When was the last time we pulled a name off of here? Hasn't been the last couple.
So maybe we tweak it a little bit and.
I just
change
mean,
it.
I think we should have a set structure, whether it's the committee's coming forward or we're telling the committee we're naming 8th Street, whatever, then we need to make the commitment from the council saying we're gonna name a street a year.
And that's what I was gonna say is the slight change to this is this back and forth here is that we can say as a council, we are going to name one thing a year, decide what that is, provide that to the naming committee we want to name this ball diamond, this pathway, whatever, and then recommendations come forth. Does that make sense? to
Sure.
you?
And then
I
traditionally,
disagree with Steve, not that I'm on council, that there's any obligation to go through that list. That was just a
That is
randomly
not what I'm-
selected thing brainstorming.
That's not what I'm
session.
saying, is that we have an obligation to that. This is where I'm arguing with it, is I think it should be
I need to,
presentations, sorry. Yeah,
I need to go back. over that.
You can.
he's gonna debate them.
I think that presentations should be made to the naming committee. The naming committee establishes their list. It comes up with a name. If there's no names on the list, then nothing comes before council and we don't name anything. If we have a name that's come through the naming committee because they've had presentations, and what was the last one we had here? That was Pearson. For example, I'm just going to grab that because it's the most recent one. That would have gone through naming committee, not here. They would have vetted, they would have had a history, they would have had a request for the street. Then on our once a year thing, when we're wanting to say, is there anything from the naming committee? They would come forward saying there's Emil Pearson came in a request. We had no other requests for the last whatever. This is all we have. Then that's where we go and we decide whether or not we're actually going to name it or we put it off for another year. That's how I see the process flowing.
I would
Councillor
think
Crum.
that's a rarity that people ask to have something named. So I don't foresee them having a whole bunch of people saying, hey, Joe and team, can you add this person to it? That, I think that's very rare. Like the 98% of this list was comprised by us coming up with founders and different people. So not a lot of it was from people asking to be added to it. And you even see some people asked to be removed from it that were on it. So like, I kind of think, and I don't think we need to name something every year, but if that helps get people off the list, great. But it was like a case by case basis in the past where there wasn't a lot of them, but hey, we'd like this named and there was a recommendation added, but we want to name every street in Slave Lake after somebody. We have a big long list to do it. But I don't know if that's what we're looking to do. And it, to me, it kind of devalues your name if it's like, hey, you're on the list and we're naming another road and you're next up, right? I like if it's something that's meaningful to the family or the person it's named after. I just don't want to name things because they're on a list.
I would have to agree, and I would have to say to that point, we had a delegation come and they actually suggested something that would mean something to that person. So to me, that should be our role then. Let's make that happen. They had a specific request that I personally don't have a problem with. So in that regard, like that makes sense to me. Why don't we do that this year? Or I don't know, have a further discussion, I guess, about what we would do moving forward, perhaps amongst council to identify, or if we have people come with a specific ask, we ask them, what would mean something to you? Or what are you looking for as we continue to move forward, right? Just.
I think oftentimes with these builders, it should, if they were builders and they were exceptional, these things should just stand out. It should be, oh yeah, ball diamonds and arena for sure. It's got to be one or the other. It can't just be a street. So I think part of that is easy. With other people, I think it could be very generic. I mean, they were just a community person, a great community person seen all over the place. How do you, I don't know.
Well, and we've kind of come full circle. I'll give, in the argument here is where we started saying, hey, we're going to provide some structure. We're going to be naming things more regularly. We still want to throw it to the naming committee saying, okay, council wants to name XYZ. Maybe we want to pick a road or whatever. But now we've all come all the way back to the exact same case by case basis before, which is fine, but that's
Okay,
administration is asking for some direction. And Councillor Adams and then
let's Steve go.
Councillor Adams.
Well, my thing here to Councillor Hughes, I want to say Kim, and I'm like, no. But is if we're gonna have the request come before council and then we're gonna make that decision, I'm okay with that process. But then what's the point of the naming committee? There's no point. We might as well just get rid of that. And then our process is the presentation.
And that's where you're saying you want the delegation to go to them. But we can't change that now. This just happened where at least.
Yeah, but we're not arguing that. We're arguing about the process here. We're not arguing
Agreed, but-
the issue.
I know, I'm just using that as an example of something recent that has happened that we can at
Yeah,
least start with.
and I
right?
understand that for being an argument against the first in, first out piece, right? I get that. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Counselor Grantland.
Yeah,
and then
I'm
I got-
for delegations. That's great. Go to the naming committee. You guys vet them, whatever. And if like the Pearson family had a spot, they could jot that in the notes, eh? And maybe that spurs them coming forward as a delegation, because nothing's saying they can't come forward and say, hey, we have this great idea, or hey, this guy's on his last legs, but we should name this after him before. I'm serious. That happens, right? You want to get someone, that's great. They come forward. But what I think maybe we should pick a date, and maybe it's around budget time, or admin could play. Maybe we could all brainstorm every year and say like, hey, there's this road, there's this park, or maybe there's nothing, because we don't have to name nothing.
We're not.
Let's pick a
obligated.
date every year where we identify an item, and if we don't identify an item, we let the naming committee know, we have no items for you, but welcome to come as a delegation anytime if something else pops up, or we'll come to you if something pops up. But let's pick a date so we have a process of every September 1st or a random number. We're gonna name a park or something, and we could all brainstorm, or admin
And
could
then
have
follow
something.
that process
Yeah.
where it goes to
Yeah.
naming committee
Yes,
with the
and it could
request.
still be nothing, but maybe it's something.
Jeff. Does that make you want to play?
Yeah, I was,
The question.
my only call, I was actually more on this, on the theme of, what triggered this was, administration's concern was that you had a delegation come to council, and we were ready potentially to act on that delegation. But what administration's concern was, well, what about the names that came before, right? And so you may, or however they got onto the list, right? And so, you know, to some extent, I thought that there was some concern regarding figuring out a process as to, are we approving one because it just happens to be the most recent, the most fresh, the first one you've ever seen that's come before this council, but
Yeah.
there's been others before that we just haven't followed through with, right? So that's, I guess, why we were looking more towards a more formal process that might help us work our way through that, but
Let's use that process where they do go to them, and they bring it to us once we identify an item, but they're still more than welcome to come as a delegation at any given time to say they're welcome to come, but we will keep the general public going to them with their history and their names, and they will come to us with their recommendations.
So there is, the process is a bit clear that we'll set a date. If that's what we're discussing now, is we set a date as council, we decide if there is a thing to name, if there is no thing to name, there.
how will you
is nothing to name.
determine what the thing is to name?
Well,
We
that's for us to
That's
do.
for us to decide.
Do you need any guidelines on that? How are you going to come to that? How are you going to decide which street or which avenue?
Well, one of at our last naming committee, I think one of the reasons we met and we are meeting is because we know that this shelter is coming up and it needs some sort of name. Now, we're not going to be looking through this list, I don't think, to find a name for that shelter. So does the naming committee do?
Yes, because-
general
so
names as well, or
I-
just people?
I don't know where the rest of this list is, and I hope Joe has it somewhere, but there's a list of indigenous meanings. There's a list of like, the evergreen, I always use.
So
that
it's not
phrase.
just people.
There's a list of words and stuff that exist somewhere that aren't just on this, and maybe they're lost somewhere. But there's other things you could do, right? Because everything doesn't need to be named after a person, right?
Yeah.
Like that gets pretty old and
Mhm.
1800s-ish if it's named after a person. So like, I would highly recommend the new homeless shelters not named after a person. It should be. You guys will come up with something, but
But that would decision again goes to the.
yeah,
Naming committee
Well,
to bring forward a
yeah,
recommendation.
exactly. So
So if
let,
we have something special that comes up, so if an entity or whatever mid-year that isn't on our annual look at this says, hey, I'm looking for a name. That gets forwarded to the naming committee for them to provide a recommendation. And then we use it as that. As that committee is that process.
yep. So we just need a process amongst ourselves, but I don't know if we need that formal of a process, like. Make it for the first budget meeting of every year. The first half an hour is spent discussing the item to be named. As silly as that sounds, it puts something in place for you, Jeff.
Counselor Adams.
I like picking like the first meeting in September because
Sure.
that's typically ahead of it. And the reason for that is simply then, if it does have a significant budget impact or
We
could,
already know.
depending what we're doing.
Yeah.
Then we can work that into the budget. and It's a commitment we're making at
Signage,
that
et
point,
cetera.
and then we can budget for it and move forward for the next year. Rather than these mid-year pop-ups, but I like the idea of still accepting mid-year pop-ups for requests. Not just on the formalized date, but I would like the formalized date as well. I like it.
Couldn't be clearer.
Do we need a summary?
I think Ashley's got most of it. We'll draft it. You can take a look at it. You can run with it. If it doesn't work, or if it's just, if we're chasing our tails again, we can always bring it back and redefine it. I think what administration was looking for is just some direction as to how you envision this process working and providing as much clarity as you think is needed, or the alternative is least amount of clarity is needed, and give the naming committee the full discretion as to which names they bring forward. I mean, if that's what you'd like to do, then that's totally fine.
Do you need a motion or do you want to bring back? a
No, there's
report?
no motion required. That should be enough.
Great discussion.
Question period.
Perfect.
Okay, as I see nothing, we have correspondence from Slave Lake Victim Services.
Yeah, so we received a letter dated January 31st, 2024 from our Slave Lake Victim Services, essentially advising of the dissolution of the Slave Lake Victim Services Society effective March 31st, 2024. As you're aware, Victim Services Alberta will be changing in 2024. Currently in the province of Alberta, there are 60 local victim service units working out of RCMP detachments. Each of these units has their own non-for-profit societies governed by their own board of directors. The change is to bring these victim service units into a new regional governance model. Each of the 4 new regions will have their own board of directors and centralized professional support staff. The local RCMP detachments will still be home to the frontline victim service workers, and they will continue to provide the same excellent level of care, compassion, and resources as they have in the past 3+ decades. Should there be any gaps in Slave Lake Victim Service Society's dissolution and the start of the new regional unit, the government will facilitate provisional services during the transitional period. It's been a pleasure working with your organization and staff, and I trust the organizational relationships will continue to follow regionalization. Please feel free to contact us should you have any questions or concerns.
Councillor Hughes,
Accept as information.
any further discussion? Call to question, those in favor, and that is carried. State of the lake. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind all the residents in Slave Lake that it is now Frost Fest for the town of Slave Lake. We'll be putting that on. It is kicking off, it runs from the 10th to the 19th. And there is a Frost Fest guideline that highlights, so there's a couple links and things on the Facebook page and stuff that will give you a guide. And it's kicking off is this Saturday, the 10th? Sure which day that is, Saturday. And there will be a Frost Fest family carnival. So there's going to be bouncy castles, obstacle course, carnival games, a kids dance, everything. Sounds like it starts around 11 a.m. at the Multi-Rec Center. Don't miss out.
Anything further from council? Okay, I'll just make a quick note that our permanent location for the homeless shelter community engagement is going to start at the end of February. The Town of Slave Lake Facebook page will be highlighting and also on Voyant the dates and times for the community engagement. I would strongly encourage everyone to find a time that they are able to come out and to participate. There'll be a couple of sessions held. Yeah, we would like to get everyone's feedback. And with that, Councillor Adams,
Motion to adjourn.
everyone in favor?
You didn't know if we had any discussion?
There's no discussion on that.